what's your dream of, what's your vision of a fully evolved human being? You know, you could say, well, Jesus is an example, or Buddha or Krishna or somebody's an example of that, or my next door neighbor or my mom. Somebody who's just, and the word that keeps coming to mind is kind. Kindness. Once we can become kind, doesn't matter, Homo sapiens, doesn't matter how much we know, how wise we are, because I'm a great believer in wisdom, but what is wisdom? It's knowledge to one degree, but it's love. And if you take wisdom and you mix it up with love, I think you get kindness.
Welcome to the Holomovement Awaken Your Purpose Podcast, where we interview incredible people that are living and breathing their purpose. And you can too. If you would like to support this programming, drop us a like or leave us a review. Now let's dive in. Hi everybody, my name is Zenka Caro. I'm founder of LightNet, and my passion and purpose is to make the impossible possible. It is a great honor to be here in the Stona studio today with Andrew Bailey. He is an author and a filmmaker extraordinaire. One of his books, The Trust Frequency, was read by Mark Simsak out loud to all of our gatherings. That's how obsessed he was with the beautiful writings that they're bringing forward. He's got a new book coming out called Holo Sapiens, which he's going to be premiering at the Holomovement Wave in Portugal in less than 3 weeks. Andrew and his beloved wife, Connie, have traveled the world speaking to the leaders in tech, in indigenous culture, in healing, mathematics, writing, you name it. These guys have really interviewed the most evolutionary voices that are around today. They've also been inducted into the evolutionary leaders this year. So thank you so much for coming, Andrew. Really an honor to have you here in the studio. And I wanted to ask you, what have you discovered your purpose to be?
What have I discovered my purpose to be? Well, firstly, thinking about my purpose, I think my purpose discovered me. It chased me around until I couldn't do anything but submit and say, okay, I can do that. And that appears to be, it started out thinking about humanity at a pretty young age and the state of humanity. I was born at the end of World War II, Coventry, England. It was a pile of rubble. It was a mess. And I don't remember much about those moments. I do have some memories from my very early age, years before I was transplanted to South Africa at the age of 3. Turned 4 in South Africa, unaware at that point of what my purpose was. But 10 years later, by the age of 14, when one of my classmates handed me a book on Zen Buddhism, and a little group of 4 or 5 of us, we were science students in a high school, English colonial, very, very high-level educational system, Oxford, Cambridge level, with this extraordinary young, it was boys' school, so this young man, 14, just post-pubescence. None of us had ever kissed a girl or any of those exciting things. So we were putting our mind into mathematics, physics, chemistry, stuff like that, to a great degree. And here comes Zen Buddhism. What does that mean? And I think my first fantasy was, and that might be a clue to my first purpose, was there was this thing called enlightenment. And I pictured it as this perfect state of just ecstatic bliss. And here we are, just sitting there with this big smile on our face, like that picture I saw of the Buddha. Wasn't that easy? Another part of the component of that was you obviously had to sit in the full lotus. And that, too, wasn't that easy. It was on the edge of impossible. So we were like foolish but good and well-intentioned young lads in search of something at that age, at 14. I think that's not that common. It was normal for us because it's what we were doing, but looking back, it's like, whoa, that's different. Fast forward many years, I find myself attracted to I'm in Durban, South Africa, and I read I think it was probably a Life magazine, and there was an article on something called cosmic consciousness. See the resonance there? Zen Buddhism, cosmic consciousness, and by this time I was a young chemistry professor in the local college. I had continued my attempts to meditate. I wasn't good at it. I had this monkey mind that kept jumping around and coming up with all sorts of cool things that I could distract me. But this idea, this two-word thing, came out of Canada apparently. Cosmic consciousness got me thinking about whatever that is I wanted. So I had a girlfriend at the time who I was madly in love with, and she said, well, if that's what you want, we've got to go to India. And I said, no, I recognize that, but no. This is coming out of, I think it's coming out of San Francisco, Northern California. So, long story short, we ended up moving to London. I sailed a sailboat across the Atlantic and ended up in Santa Cruz, California, just down from San Francisco. She took one of those buses, a double-decker English bus, to India, and we haven't seen each other since. So I'm still heartbroken, but I can handle it. So I get to Santa Cruz. At the time, I thought my purpose was, now I'd done a lot of academics. I had 7 years of university behind me and some degrees and stuff like that. And I was in search of, now that's an academic purpose. What am I training myself for? And I knew it had something to do with humanity. It had something to do with cosmic consciousness. It had something to do with the inner realities. And so I get to the University of California, Santa Cruz, and it's a brand new campus. And they had a program there called the History of Consciousness. And I thought, oh, that's it. So I go and I sign up for this, and I get into it, and I'm like, nope, that's not it. Okay. Meanwhile, I started going down to Esalen Institute in Big Sur, and with all the, the gurus and the psychotherapists and all those extraordinary people there. So this whole idea of the human potential and human consciousness was beginning to bubble up in me. But I'm at the university, and I'm like, I talked to the professor. I said, look, it really is not what I'm looking for. What are you looking for? So I explained what I thought I was looking for. And he said, you need to be in the psychobiology department. I'm like, seriously? I said, yep. I'll make an appointment for you. So next thing, I'm sitting in the office with an English professor, researcher, named Ralph Berger, Berger, who was a big deal in later years. He became the master expert on sleep studies. So I'm sitting with Ralph and telling him my thoughts. And he says, well, it won't do you any harm to take this course. We're going to be doing mostly sleep studies. I wasn't interested in sleep studies. I said, okay, that's something. I wasn't even interested in brain chemistry. I want to know it from the operator standpoint. If I have a brain, I want to know how to maximize it, how to use it to the best. If I have a heart, if I have a spirit, if I have consciousness. From the operator standpoint, I wanted to know how to do that. And I've been trying for about 12 years at that time, since age 14. Here I am, 26. So I'm going down to Big Sur, going down to Esalen, coming back to the university, and just within a month, the decision was made for me. My purpose grabbed me by the neck and sat me down at Esalen. Now, it wasn't there much because it was expensive, and I didn't have any money. So I could only be invited to things, and I was, from time to time, like Aldous Huxley's wife, Laura Huxley, said, I'm teaching I'll be there for a week, come. I'd met her in L.A. Come. And hell yeah, I showed up. So I got to sort of sit in on some things and get the peripheral viewpoint on it, as opposed to the people paying a lot of money to sit in circles for week-long retreats and workshops and things. So little did I know my purpose was sneaking up on me from behind. And about 2 years later, it was probably 72. Yeah, so it started in 1970. 72, I had an idea that hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was I'd realized that Esalen was also not going to give me what I needed. I was going to get this PhD in something important, something of value. I wasn't going to go and just do another several years of, you know. I was kind of done with mainstream academia. So what I ended up doing is forming my own nonprofit 501c3 organization. I'm 27 years old. I just met my first wife, who was best friends with the Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan and Richie Havens and those people. So we're doing a lot of fun stuff around the music scene. And starting this thing that I didn't know what we were going to call it, but I knew what it did. We were going to do what Esalen did. I'm a sailor, so I had dibs on a 100-foot hermaphrodite brigantine with a certain rigged sailboat in the Caribbean on a certain beach that I happened to know about that I could rent for an affordable thing. Got this 100-foot boat that slept, I think it slept like 29, and we could have retreats there. And we had some property in Santa Cruz, up in the Santa Cruz Mountains and the Redwoods, where we could do like a summer thing there and a winter thing in the Caribbean. So this whole idea came about. And I'm going like, we've got to have a name for it. And the name came, and the name was a word I'd never heard before, Sananda. Sananda. That's a great name. What, does it mean anything? No answer, okay. Found out later what Sananda meant, you might know, Zenka.
I actually don't know what it means.
Sananda turns out to be, well, I was having this vision, and I'm still writing books that the seeds of which are back then. And I wrote a book called I, Sananda. Not I, Andrew Sananda, but from the perspective of planet Earth, fully evolved to a single conscious entity called Sananda, no longer a planet, but a star. The planet had achieved stardom. Now, instead of absorbing energy from out there, it was emanating energy, and its name was Sananda. And so it became the Sananda Foundation. Then I go up to Mount Shasta, and I'm sitting up at the 8,000-foot level because there are all kinds of, everything from UFOs to 12-foot tall, enlightened, ascended masters and so on. If you just sit on this rock and wait, right? I sat in the rock and waited all night, nothing happened. So in the morning it's getting light, and here come three people out of the fog. Two young women and a guy. And we met like that. And they'd been way up higher in the clouds and had all of these experiences. And they were telling me, I said, did anything happen? They said, you won't believe it, kind of thing. And I said, what happened? They said, well, the first person who showed up was Sananda. And I'm like, seriously? So I said, what was that? He said, well, he's the I Am Foundation, he's one of the ascended masters, and he's Jesus. And I'm like, seriously? Anyway, so that was sort of the seed of this whole thing. I could go on and on and on because it's a long and complex story. But speaking of purpose, so at that point I had this purpose, and we worked really hard on it. We got a funder. Somebody showed up who had just left. He was a major IBM executive. He had a bunch of money. And he said, I love what you're doing. Let's do it. And I've got the money, and let's do this thing. And so we started to put together our first series of workshops. And we had 40 of the top thinkers in the country. It was going to be, well, Swami Satchidananda was one of them, for example. Laura Huxley, who was my friend, was one of them. Richie Havens was going to come in. So there was a lot of different variations. Jerry Garcia was considering it. And then we had the list, the usual suspects. And, Alan Watts and so on. And everybody was saying yes. So we put a catalog together and put a schedule together, get this whole thing. Mailed the catalog off to Sacramento to the printers. And it never got there. It disappeared. We sent it by courier. So there was a huge amount of work that went into that, from the artwork on the front to the whole thing, to this prepping this whole thing. So I was going to the printers. It never got there. So which was a huge setback. And we're just sitting there and going like, whoa, what do we do now? And those were the days I had a little Smith Corona typewriter, and you had to sit down and write letters to people. And I had to sit down and write 40 letters to people because we had to put it on hold. 40 letters later, and then the guy who was our funder, that included our home and our food, and it was a big, beautiful house up in the Redwoods. He met a girl, a woman with a couple of kids, and everything shifted in his life. And he, within about 2 weeks of losing the catalog, he pulls the plug. And we're like, okay. So about 2 years of, later I realized that was my research, if you like. If I'm doing an academic thing, if I was going to write, never did get a PhD, never did write a thesis specifically. But boy, did I learn a lot from all of those 40 people, for example, just by engaging with them, finding out who they are, what they did. And I've stayed with that. Ended up moving to the East Coast. Ended up sitting in on the initial founding conversations that became the Omega Institute with Pierre Vilayat Khan and his circle, and on the East Coast. Then meeting a girl from South Africa who became the mother of my children, moving back to Santa Cruz because of the home childbirth situation there. Finally coming back with 3 kids to the East Coast. Omega has opened its doors, and that's been. And then I met my beloved Connie at Omega Institute in 2003. And I could say that Connie was a part of my purpose arriving as well, and so helpful in that regard, in the sense that once we got together, there was nothing to be. I'd just finished raising 5 kids. That's a full-time job. As an immigrant with no family support or anything, here you are, getting out with these hands as a carpenter, eventually as a designer builder, doing pretty darn well, and going through all the economic cycles and things, building a business and supporting the kids. Then the marriage breaking up, and then very shortly after that, meeting Connie, and who had this articulation of reality that's profound. It's the basis of the Trust Frequency book that I kept saying to Connie, you've got to write a book. And she's saying all this amazing stuff. And Andrew's like, Connie, you've got to write a book. This is great. You've got to write a book. Well, guess what? She wasn't going to write a book. I ended up writing the book. It worked really well as a collaboration, took these beautiful, the skeleton of the whole thing became the Trust Frequency book, which I know you know. And so I structured it, put into 10 assumptions for a new paradigm. So it became, I gave it a skeleton, a structure, and then brought in all my stuff, all my background into Connie's, which was completely unique. I think she'd had a lot of inspiration from the Native Americans, but it wasn't Native American. It was unique. After all of those gurus and teachers, and here I was in Santa Cruz in those days where every major master came through, whether it was Native Americans to yogis and Sufis and on and on.
Wow.
That was the short version of my purpose chasing me around until I said, okay, I'm ready.
I love how you said, I don't know what cosmic consciousness is, but I want it.
Whatever that is.
Whatever that is, I'll take that.
And wherever it is, I'm going there.
Right.
So I went there, and it turned out to be Santa Cruz, California, which is it was right after the Summer of Love, 67. I get there at the end of 69. And people had moved out of the city, and it was sort of the back to the land movement. And a whole bunch of extraordinary people had settled in Santa Cruz, which at the time and there was a brand new campus. 1968, University of California, Santa Cruz opened, and then there was Cabrillo College, this really cool community college. It was an amazing place to be, and found this tribe there were moon festivals and drumming. I started playing congas and stuff, and just all this stuff that was great. And then, as Connie loves to remind me, and there was another inspiration, wasn't there? And I said, well, yeah, there was a song by the Beach Boys, California Girls. And it's true. There were quite a few California girls who really brightened the whole thing, because we'd sit there and drum, and these California girls would dance, and it was like just being in heaven.
You didn't talk about your new book, Holo Sapiens, and your film Around the World. Tell us a little bit about what the book is about and what you're going to be presenting at Holomovement Wave with it.
Okay. I think you said Holo Sapiens?
Isn't that what it's called?
And everybody thinks Homo Sapiens. It's exactly the same phrase with the M turned into an L, and it changes everything. So Homo Sapiens is the species of which you and I are theoretically a part, which means we are the wise ones, I believe, something like that. And we're so wise that we even say Homo Sapiens Sapiens, like we're the ones so wise that we know that we're wise. Okay, looking around, I wonder whether we've reached that place yet. So the essence of the book, the subtitle is Conscious Evolution in Action. Conscious Evolution in Action. Conscious evolution is a thing. It's been going on for about 100 years. Started out with Sri Aurobindo, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and a bunch of other thinkers all the way up to Ken Wilber and current, and then, of course, Barbara Marx Hubbard, who was a friend of ours and a colleague of ours. And she became sort of known as the mother of conscious evolution. So Holo Sapiens is, Barbara had never had that term. She had Homo Universalis. We were going to become this whole new species. And I'd always say to her, Barbara, are we even Homo sapiens yet? Never mind Homo Universalis. And we'd have those conversations, and we never agreed on much at all, because I had my perspective, she had hers. But it was a really challenging and excellent relationship, right? So the idea for the book came about last year at the Holomovement Wave in Asheville, North Carolina. And I was standing there with Laura, the founder, co-founder, watching a friend of mine up on stage, Samuel J. Hallam, who I think you know. And Sam was on stage looking at me and going like, what? You know, he had no idea I was there. I knew he was coming on stage, but he's looking like, what? And then I'm looking around at the crowd, the audience, and I'm going like, okay, who are these people? What if we should have a name for these people, because we're somewhat different from the rest of humanity. The people in that dark theater, looking at them, are something special, something different. And I said, Holo movement. And I came up with Holo people. So this is just me in my mind standing there listening to Sam play music. And Holo people arrives. We drive away and we're heading cross country to our next adventure. And somewhere out in the middle of there, it became Holo Sapiens. And it became a book, an idea for a book. So we ended up in Vermont at another beautiful Native American, mostly Native American gathering. And we were staying with a friend, and I had a place to work, and I sat there, and I just got the book drafted, Holo Sapiens. And the way, if a book comes to me, I just put a whole series of chapter headings together, structured as an introduction, a conclusion, and a bunch of stuff in between. And I just decide what that is, put it in order, and then make some notes, and then start going chapter by chapter and writing it. That was, that'll be a year ago in July. So it's not even a year ago. And then once we got back home to Sunrise Ranch, where we've been living for the last 9 years, I got to sit down and really craft this book. And here in Sedona, I'm in the very final InDesign. I'm literally doing and having trouble with the table of contents now. So everything's there, everything's structured. I have these tweaky things to do, and they're giving me a really hard time. But that's the new book, Holo Sapiens, Conscious Evolution in Action. And it takes everything I've ever learned, plus a bunch of research on top of that, to put this book together, because it sets out to really, firstly, to sort of review the whole history of the idea of conscious evolution. As Barbara Marx Hubbard said, we are the first generation to consciously know that we are evolving, and to realize that we can get involved with that evolution, and so that we can intentionally or consciously evolve. So that's what the book is about, that idea, and bringing it down, putting it boots on the ground. How do we do that? What's involved? And it's not like my 14-year-old self who thought we're all going to get enlightened and we're going to be floating in space in the full lotus pose. You know, no, not quite like that. It's a very simple, it's not a physical evolutionary change. It's not a biological evolutionary change. It's a metaphysical evolutionary change. It's inner. You can't see it. It's invisible, so you can't suppress it. You can't make it illegal. You can't bust people for becoming it. But it is manifesting the potential of the human being that, from my perspective, hasn't been fully manifested. There have been enlightened people. There have been kind people. There have been people of integrity. There have been people of sincerity, always. But those are the defining characteristics of Holo Sapiens. And we can make a conscious choice. We have total free will. We can be a complete idiot forever. We can behave just like everyone else. We can use violence and all of that. Or we can change our minds. And the Trust Frequency book is about changing our minds. A mind is a thing that we can actually change. We can decide to be a certain way. We can decide to think a certain way. We can certainly decide to behave and act a certain way. So once we become kind, kindness, integrity, sincerity, and coherence. Those are the elements. So that's what the book attempts to do. And I think it succeeds. You know, as you edit a new work, you know, for a long time you're sort of just lost in the middle there. But now I'm really going through with all these it's like the sculptor, you know, just working the little bits, you know, and finding the typos and stuff like that. And I like it. I think it's good. And I think it succeeds in assembling everything that I have collected in terms of ideas and understandings of the nature of the universe and the nature of your reality from childhood to the present moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think it really is about honing our consciousness, the subconscious mind and the conscious mind to actually be a little intentional about how we're showing up.
It's a ridiculously simple thing to the point that most people say, well, that can't be real. It's too simple. You know, It's got to be hard work. You've got to sit there and meditate for hours. Right. No, you just have to decide to be. What's your dream of? What's your vision of a fully evolved human being? You know, you could say, well, Jesus is an example, or Buddha, or Krishna, or somebody's an example of that, or my next door neighbor, or my mom. Somebody who's just, and the word that keeps coming to mind is kind. Kindness. Once we can become kind, doesn't matter, Homo sapiens, doesn't matter how much we know, how wise we are, because I'm a great believer in wisdom, but what is wisdom? It's knowledge to one degree, but it's love. And if you take wisdom and you mix it up with love, I think you get kindness. So this is what the picture I'm attempting to paint here is, you know that word humankind? Can we be kind? Just kind.
Andrew, what was the biggest struggle that you faced in living your purpose?
What's the biggest struggle? That's interesting. It just, quite honestly, it never felt like a struggle. You know, it's not easy. I raised 5 kids, and parts of that were challenging economically as a dad, as an immigrant, where you have to get out. You're in New York City, and you've got to make enough money to pay the bills and get them through college and all that stuff. That worked pretty well. It was tough because the economy goes up and down, and there'd be some kind of stock market crash, and at times it'd get tough, and they did. But I had a good family, and we did a good job. It was okay. So that's not it. I don't see a struggle. I mean, any more than when I first tried to meditate as a young teenager. The struggle to meditate was just, I have this mind that's just, it's full of ideas. And the minute I can meditate for like 30 seconds, I get so many ideas that just jump into my head and but I don't see that as a struggle. I've learned to just let them go. And then it's important when I get up from my meditation, go write them down, make some notes, put them on the to-do list.
I love it. I love it. So what advice would you have for other people that are looking for their purpose and passion?
Number one, breathe. In the book, and in my Substack, actually a recent Substack that I wrote, 3 things that are critical. One is to sit. Sit. Stop. Sit. Just sit. What do you do? Nothing except sit. Sit. Stop. Second, breathe. So once you've stopped your outer activity, and this is, a lot of people say, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy. That's a waste of time. To me, it's my most precious time of my day. And I didn't have time for it when I was raising my kids. I'd get up at 7, I'd have to be at work at 8, and make sure the kids got to school and all that, and I didn't have time for it. What I do now is instead of getting up at 5, instead of getting up at 7, I get up at 5. Now I've got 2 hours every morning that are my time. And during that time, what do? I sit, I breathe, and as I breathe, I remember. So that's it. Sit, breathe, remember. So breathing there are lots and lots of pranayamas and breathing practices of various kinds. I have a very simple thing I do, and it's just conscious breathing with a rhythm. And if the monkey mind comes in with a great idea, thank you, put in the little stash over there. And then as that combination of just sitting and breathing, the Sufi practice, which I did for many years, 25 years, I think, is about remembering. It's all about remembering who you are and about eliminating all the fantasies and the fake, the masks, what's called the nafs, the illusory self, the false ego, all of those things, and remembering who you really are and what you're really a part of. And once you get to that Sufi state of oneness, there is no you. It's just all. You could even say Allah, because that's what it's about, because it comes out of Islam. Well, actually, Islam came out of it in a sense. So, sit, breathe, remember. 3 words of advice.
I love that. What, over your life, what effect do you think you've had on other people by you living your purpose?
I've probably annoyed quite a few folks, because when one is living one's purpose, there is a certain responsibility to that purpose. If I reach a point of great clarity that, boy, I have to do this, and that's going to take some doing, and it's going to take some time, and I'm going to have to put my energy there. So it's not easy to do that when you're in a marriage, in a situation where you have kids, for example. So the challenges for me, like I have 5 beautiful kids, but I don't get on with all of them. I'd say I get on really well with 3 of them, and 2 of them have just kind of cut me off. So that's, that was, when my firstborn daughter did that, I must have had 100 sleepless nights, literally sleepless nights, because I'm just lying awake going through emotional stuff. Those would be the main challenges. And, daily life does take a lot of attention and time. You have to get up, and you can't finish the job you're doing because you've got to get up and come over to the studio and do some stuff, But, it's all about attitude. And if you can just be in what we call the trust frequency of just saying, okay, I wouldn't have chosen it that way, but I really do have to do this now. So you pack it up and go do that, and it's all good. And there's always actually enough time, because that's the other stressor, time. The sense of not having enough time. I've got to get this done by this certain moment. The book, I had a plan, and I am about 3.5 months behind on that plan right now, because it took me so much to learn the program in design to be able to create the book. Writing the book was easy. Everything was easy. It was ready to go. And then when I sat down at that thing, I just hit the wall. It was really hard. I literally had to give up and come down here to Sedona from Loveland, Colorado, and move out of where we'd been for the last 9 years. And you can't be finishing your book while you're doing that. Had to just stop and pick it up later. So I think with everything, having patience and trusting the timing, trusting the process, and picking yourself up when you fall down.
That's great advice, because anything worth doing is usually a multi-step process where there's definitely going to be some unknowns. So the final question, Andrew, for you is, what do you think the world would be like if the majority of people were living their purpose?
That's what the Holo Sapiens book is about. And it's not necessarily about purpose as in my purpose is to be the best art teacher ever, or those kinds of purposes, or to be the best artist ever. There are different individuals. We all come here with our particular collection of gifts. So, when we arrive with a purpose. And you could say, okay, and our job, and we tend to forget. We're born, and perhaps before birth, perhaps as a spirit being, we know something that we then forget, and then to discover our purpose. But Holo Sapiens is an upgrade to our species that means that you become kind, a person of integrity, you become a person of sincerity, and you become a person of coherence. Those factors, it doesn't matter what the specific manifestation is, because that's individual. And we have we can choose our state, we can choose our consciousness, we can choose what state of mind we're operating from. And when we realize that, whoa, I'm not, and I get stressed. And when I get stressed, boy, I got to stop and take a walk and breathe and stuff, because time jumps on me like it does. We're a species that hasn't yet manifested its highest potential. And once we do, and this is what I bring in the Holo Sapiens book, is how to do that. If that's possible, how do we do it? What's it going to take? And once we do that, it changes everything. Because we no longer do violence. We no longer do war. We no longer put any of our resources to weapons of mass destruction. We just don't do that. It's a distortion of what we're here to be. We drop all that stuff. We don't need separate countries. We don't need immigration departments. We don't need borders. We don't need any of that stuff. That's all illusory stuff created to serve certain people. We are free. We are kind. We are love incarnate.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We'll see you with Andrew and Connie at the Holomovement Wave in Portugal. Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to get to know some of the most important thought leaders in the consciousness movement, I invite you to join us for the Holomovement Wave in Portugal, May 29th through June 2nd. There is going to be incredible luminaries there, such as Lynn Twist, Lynn McTaggart, Samuel J., Shamini Jain, Samantha Sweetwater. These are scientists, musicians, and leading thought leaders in the consciousness movement. And this is your chance to fly into Lisbon, head over to the Cascais beaches, and really spend time to get to know, to plan, and cohere with some of the most important leaders on the planet as we head into this new age. It is our goal to give you the courage to begin to identify your passion and live your purpose for the sake of yourself and for the sake of us all. Over the course of this multi-year collaboration and research project, we have identified patterns and a 7-stage process that many people go through on their way to living their purpose. If you'd like to browse our archive or figure out what stage you're in, head over to holomovement.net/purpose. If you would like to browse our living library of resources, or if you found your purpose and want to contribute what worked for you, head over to lightnet.org/purpose. And as Mark Twain used to say, the most important day of your life is the day you're born and the day you figure out why. You're not alone. We will look forward to helping you on this incredible journey. This has been a collaboration between Holomovement, LightNet, and incredible people like yourself. Special thanks to Good of the Whole. We'll see you next time.